Has taken time out of his busy schedule to be here this evening, but he's also made several presentations in the past, and I've heard just wonderful accolades of the things that he has done, and we're really looking forward to it. But it's my pleasure to introduce to you the former state court solicitor, Mr. Richard Shelton.
Thank you, Brian. Well, this is just a little matter that I got interested in. My father had this book in his library, Kings Mountain and His Heroes. Kings Mountain was a battle in northern South Carolina, just barely over the line from North Carolina and South Carolina. We had an ancestor that was in the battle on my mother's side, and I just picked up the book, started reading it, just got real interested in it. This book was published in 1891, based on a lot of interviews with some. In 3 years, all the battles were in the north. And essentially was a stalemate with Washington and the Continental Army and the local militias in the north. It had been a stalemate. In the south, the Patriots were victorious immediately in 1776. The British were ousted from Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Patriots took over the governments of those states in 1776. Our first Constitution was 1776. A lot of loyalists in the southern states fled to England. They fled to other colonies too, but they fled to England. And as the war stalemated for the British in the north, those southern loyalists in London persevered on the British War Office to adopt a different strategy for attacking the South. That they could win the revolution by campaigning in the South, that the South was full of loyalists, that just as soon as the British Army got there, they would rise up to assist the British Army, and that would be the basis for winning the revolution. So they adopted a southern campaign. In 1778, they invaded, they recaptured Savannah. By 1779, they had recaptured Charleston. They re-entered the capital of North Carolina. When Savannah fell to the British, the Georgia government fled to Augusta, and they went and captured Augusta. So they had great success in 1778. Then they go into 1779. From the base in Charleston, the strategy was to go north to defeat the local militia, defeat the Continental Army. All these loyalists would rise up. They could supply the army as it marched north, and they would invade the remaining colonies from the north. Cornwallis marched up to Camden. He sent a Lieutenant Patrick Ferguson to the west, his west flank. Washington sent a Continental Army under Horatio Gates. Horatio Gates marched his army from Virginia about 3 days going. When they got down into South Carolina, at the battle that's called the Waxhaws, they were defeated miserably. They were exhausted, they were tired. They had, the book says they had turned to eating corn right off the stalk in order to, back then armies ate on the move. And the British commander was Carleton, who was a very vicious British commander. He's the one immortalized in the movie Patriot. And they executed men who were trying to surrender at Waxhaw. And it became like the Remember the Maine, Remember the Alamo, and it affected a lot of the thinking in the southern states as to the behavior of the British. But the British had been nothing but victorious. Now most of the armies, this is Patrick Ferguson, the leader of the British. He was a major. He was like one of the second in command. Come in. Those who late have to sit on the front row,
He saved us a whole bench.
Yeah. He was the best marksman in the British Army. He actually invented this rifle that he's holding. The Ferguson rifle, which was a breech loader. It was capable of being loaded here. And, the British musket, American muskets too, loaded like this. They had to stand to reload. This weapon can be loaded from laying down. And he got it patented in England, and they produced about 500 of them. But its main problem, it had a hole in it, and it tended to break. So it never really took off, and it really never was followed up in the ensuing years of military history. He had been wounded in a campaign against Washington. Supposedly at one time he had Washington in the sights of this rifle and did not pull the trigger because it was ungentlemanly to deliberately shoot an officer. That was the British thing. The Patriots didn't care about that. They were perfectly willing to target officers, and did in this war and in the War of 1812. He was wounded horribly in his right arm. He learned to shoot all over again with his left. He was a good soldier in terms of being a British soldier. This is a depiction of the British, of the locals rising up to be British soldiers. The British had to recruit locals in the Carolinas and Georgia to be in the army. They turned to various tactics. They would imprison a man and say, well, we're not going to release you unless your sons join the army, the British army. They would go into a town and there might be 4 bakers. And they would go to the one baker who had military age sons, and they would say, your son will be in our militia, our army, and we'll buy all our baker goods from you, and we'll put the other 3 out of business. It was and this was resented by the local pipers. There was a lot of coercion in building up the militia. A lot of what I'm referring to as the British Army were really regulars from Delaware. There was one group of New York Rangers. There was a group from Delaware and Pennsylvania. They were regulars in the British Army, but they were from the colony. And this aspect of it is lost to history. The Civil War in 1860, in the mind of a lot of people, was not the first invasion of the South by the North. A lot of the people that participated in the battle for the Patriots and remembered that they were invaded by people from New Jersey and Delaware and Pennsylvania. They got mixed results. They had some folks join their forces. They would forage. They would, when they would go out on reconnoiter, they would go, and here would be a farmhouse. They would go in the farmhouse, help themselves to whatever they needed in terms of food, certainly. They would take quilts, take household goods, and some of them, would pick up a couple pieces of silver. During this time, of course, the homesteaders would hear they were coming. They would take this silver out and bury it, and they generally would flee and just let them ransack the place. These were the Patriot leaders in the battle of King Mountain. They were in eastern Tennessee, what is now eastern Tennessee, Elizabethtown, Johnson City, on up to Bristol. At that time, it was western North Carolina. It was over the Appalachians. They were referred to as over the mountain. Later on, Shelby was the first governor of Kentucky. Seaver was the first governor of Tennessee. Seaverville, when you go to Pigeon Forge, go to Seaverville. They had illustrious careers after their being commanders at Kings Mountain. Seaver was a political enemy of Andrew Jackson in later years. Matter of fact, he made some comment about Jackson's wife that offended Jackson. So Jackson challenged him to a duel. and they were to meet out at the dueling place. And Seaver's horse ran off with his pistol. Jackson comes along and is not overcome with a sense of fairness about it. Jackson pulls his pistol anyway. I think there were some words exchanged. Jackson pulls his pistol and points it at Seaver. Seaver's second, the second, the guy who's called, pulls his pistol and points it at Jackson. Jackson's second pulls his pistol. We've got 4 guys, 3 pistols, everybody pointing at everybody. Finally, he cooled her head for a bit. Jackson, in the final analysis, couldn't shoot an unarmed man. So they called the duel and never picked it back up. Jackson at the time, of course, already had one bullet. But I digress. Excuse me. These guys came over the mountain and skirmished with Ferguson in western North Carolina and had some success. They took some prisoners and defeated them and ran them off. And this kind of irritated Ferguson. So Ferguson sent this message. He had captured somebody, an officer from western North Carolina, and he wrote this message and said, "Take this to Seaver and Shelby. If you do not desist from your opposition to the British arms, I will march my army over the mountains, hang your leader, and lay your country to fire and sword." And Seaver and Shelby, of course, reprinted it, sent it out in the network of the Appalachian communities, and that just got them all upset. They all were riled. The whole war had been over there for them all the year. They had been out of the war.